Welcome to Bamfordrose and another question of the week. This week's question is in two parts and both are concerned with geometry settings on any Aston and the feedback and feel that you get in the car. First part of the question is, what do the pro geometry or garages that specialise in geometry setup do on Astons different to what you can do or we can do here in this workshop? So we have a geometry ramp, four-poster with turntables, and we have brackets and kit to set up on each corner and measure all steering angles, camber, caster, toe, and on average we're probably doing about 3 complete geometry setups per week. So we've got access to, it's just nuts and bolts, all of the same suspension geometry adjustment points that anyone else can adjust. So to set up geometry on an Aston, you don't have to be a specialist geometry workshop, you just need to know what you're doing. Often the comment is that the owner just wants the car to turn in a bit quicker, or perhaps it doesn't feel equal responsiveness left turns to right turns, and that's why they might seek out a specialist geometry workshop. The race world is where geometry setup is absolutely crucial. So if you walk into any race shop, they're probably going to be specialising in a few different marques, and they're going to have equipment that very quickly goes onto the suspension wishbone arms or the wheel if they're doing a Geo with the wheel on the car, and use laser alignment on each of the 4 corners. So that piece of laser alignment kit, upwards of 25k, super expensive, and it means that you can do the job one man and you can do it quite quickly. The old school way of doing it, instead of having the laser go between a couple of reference points, it's going to be wire which you set up on axle stands around the car. Then instead of the computer reading the laser, it will be a man using a camber or caster gauge and a ruler with the reference point of the wire to adjust the geometry setup. That's going to take 2 men and it's going to take a longer time than the laser alignment system, but ultimately both ways of doing it are measuring the same thing, and arguably there's no inaccuracy with the old school way of doing it with wire and gauges and ruler over the laser. Motorsport shops will have the laser system and all the brackets to very quickly attach to the car and do a one-man Geo setup. But equally you'll find a lot of motorsport shops that still use wire only. Obviously it's a lot cheaper, but not just that. There's some real craftsmanship in terms of setting the wire up around the car and measuring with a ruler and making adjustments and remeasuring, as opposed to putting some laser system around a car and then pressing a go button on a computer and then a computer telling you what adjustments to make and what the re-measurement was after the adjustment was made. There's some old school satisfaction to be had in doing it with rulers, gauges and wires. Unfortunately, from the factory and from production, geometry setup is a bit like the paint. The paint needs a good detail after it's left the factory, and the geometry needs optimizing also. And Aston's standard geometry settings keep the car nice and safe, whereas if you just ramp on a few settings you can get the car turning in a lot faster. So in terms of setting the car's basic geometry up, there's no real difference in what a dedicated geometry setup company will do compared to anybody else, and there's no real gain to be had in that being set up by laser alignment over a more traditional toolkit. But the standard factory geometry settings can be improved to get a more responsive car. So I said we'd cover corner weights. So if the motorsport car had its geometry set perfectly and then went out on track, and maybe it was neutral in right hand turns yet had a bit of oversteer in left hand turns, a geometry setup was done after that on the car, and then the exact reverse happened and you could never find the sweet spot in handling, the next thing to do would be to corner weight set up the car. This is where a scale is put under each corner, and the clue's in the name. If you want 50-50 weight distribution, then the weight on all four corners will be equal. The way to adjust that would be to shim the spring, adjusting preload on the damper, and that would be done with the interior simulating the car around the track. So it would have an average amount of fuel in, the weight of the driver, and then the corner weights could be precisely set up, and it will probably balance that aerostate handling characteristic I spoke about just a moment ago. But to corner weight a road car is probably going a little bit over the top. Do you do it for a passenger in the passenger seat? Yes or no? Luggage in the back? Yes or no? Empty tank, full tank? So it's probably not worth corner weight setting up your road car, and it's just worth getting the geometry set up perfectly and maybe tweaked to give a bit better, quicker turn in. Of course, there's no point going to the ultimate in terms of getting your geometry right if suspension wishbone bushes are worn or springs and dampers are not in serviceable condition. And this leads us on to the second part of this question, which is, I've got the geometry set up, I know this, but the car still doesn't feel rewarding to turn in. It doesn't feel that it's given me good feedback. I feel detached from what's actually going on the wheels versus what I can feel sat in the car behind the steering wheel. And I get this comment a lot, this question a lot, and in my opinion it's all down to a too intrusive dynamic stability control setup on each car. Without you really know it, when you're going into corner, the dynamic stability control system is doing something because it thinks it needs to keep the car on the same arc as what the steering wheel angle sensor is suggesting it should be following, and it's going to grab each brake corner and make small applications of the brake to keep the car on the same arc as what the steering wheel is inputting. Again, this is programmed to keep the car ultra safe. And on the newer cars, if you were to turn the car into track mode, then you'll find that all of a sudden you haven't got that interfering dynamic stability control intervention, and the car all of a sudden starts to be responsive, give you feedback, turn in as you'd expect. In track mode, you can have a better play with the car. You can get it out of shape a bit. The dynamic stability control system is still going to be there in the background and prevent a complete loss. So by switching it into track mode, that's worth a go. Obviously, we don't want anyone to lose a car, so just put it in track mode and take it on a known stretch of road and gradually build up speed to the point that you normally are, and then just push it a little bit more, and you'll feel that the car has got a lot more to give in terms of handling, getting out of shape a little bit, before you really do need an intervention from dynamic stability control. On the early level cars without track mode, obviously that's not possible. You've basically got to switch. You've either got full dynamic stability control and traction control, or you've got absolutely nothing. So turning that system off and then pushing on the car a little bit more needs to be done with greater caution. I highly recommend flipping through the back classified section of any automotive publication, Evo's a good one, to try and see performance driving coaches advertising there that will take you maybe on one day using your own car around Millbrook or Myra, and then the next day again in your car out on the road to take those skills that you've learned and experience of how your car handles in a safe setting out onto the road and learn and enjoy the car a bit more. V12 VS, DBS, any of the Astons with electronic adaptive damping, in stiff mode, in track mode, you know, these cars are great drivers' machines and can be spiritedly driven, give you good feedback yet not bite you. The earlier cars that without adaptive damping and not on Bilstein suspension on the dynamics dampers are not as good handling cars as Bilstein damper cars, But they can be evolved, and even though you haven't got track mode, you know, if you've got V8 Vantage and you retrofit Vantage S and then turn off the dynamic stability control, you know, that's a cracking, rewarding driver's car when the car is evolved to that level of setup. So this comment often comes from owners that have come from Porsche or fast European saloon cars. The Aston is a bit vague, doesn't turn in as quick, and by gaining confidence in turning off some of the too intrusive electronics, by evolving suspension to a good spec, and by having a basic Geo setup done with those settings adapted from factories to a little bit of a faster road, then it is possible to enjoy the same driving dynamics in the Aston. Hope you enjoyed that question of the week, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. As always, it really helps us if you can hit that subscribe button, and please like and comment.